Everyone in this town says I look like a dead girl. I moved to Millbrook to disappear. After the divorce, after losing the house, after everything fell apart in ways I couldn't explain to anyone, I wanted a place where nobody knew my name. 2 stoplights, 1 grocery store, rent I could actually afford. It seemed perfect. The landlord stared at me when I picked up my keys. "Have we met before?" I told him I'd never been to Millbrook in my life. He nodded slowly but kept glancing at me while I signed the lease, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. By the end of my first week, I'd had the same interaction 15 times. The cashier at the grocery store said, "Oh, you're back," then got confused when I corrected her. The coffee shop owner's hand trembled when she gave me my change. A group of teenagers crossed the street to avoid me, one of them looking back with something like fear. It wasn't the recognition that unsettled me. It was the way people reacted to whoever they thought I was. I finally asked Carl, the hardware store owner, directly. He was in his 70s, more curious than afraid, and he studied my face for a long moment before speaking. "You really don't know who you look like?" When I said no, he shook his head. "Then it's not my place to tell you." That night I called my mother, asked if we'd ever visited Millbrook. She'd never heard of it. But when I mentioned the town to my aunt, the line went quiet. "Why are you asking about Millbrook?" "I moved here." She hung up. When I called back, she wouldn't answer. Finally a text. "Get out of that town. Today." I didn't leave. I should have. But something had taken root in me. The need to understand felt almost physical, like a splinter I couldn't stop touching. At the bank, the teller went pale when she saw me. She brought the manager, who asked for 2 forms of ID while glancing at something behind the counter. I caught a glimpse of it, a grainy photograph taped to the wall, a woman who looked exactly like me. "What is that?" I asked. She covered it quickly. "Security protocol." I went to the library. The archives were unavailable, but the librarian leaned close and whispered 2 words before walking away. February 2019. I searched online for hours. Every link was dead. Every article had been removed. Something had been erased from the internet, and I was walking around wearing its face. A week later, I came home to find my apartment door open. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved. My photo albums rearranged. My laptop opened. Someone was trying to figure out who I was. That made 2 of us. I started having dreams about a house I'd never seen, a room with yellow curtains, the smell of smoke. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, certain I'd forgotten something important. The line between what I knew and what I didn't know kept blurring. Then I found the grave. It was in the old cemetery on the edge of town. Fresh flowers on recently cleaned stone. The name had been scratched off, deliberately destroyed. Only the date remained. February 15th, 2019. Behind the headstone was a small photograph in a weatherproof frame. I picked it up and my whole body went cold. It was me. Exactly me. Same face, same eyes, same small scar above my left eyebrow from a fall when I was 7. But I was wearing clothes I'd never owned, standing in front of a house I'd never seen. I heard footsteps behind me. Half the town stood at the cemetery entrance. Carl stepped forward, his face unreadable. "We always knew you'd come back," he said. "That's not me." I held up the photograph, but my voice shook. "I've never been here before." "Her name was Eleanor Price," Carl said quietly. "She lived here for 3 years, kept to herself, seemed nice enough. Then one night in February, she set fire to the community center during the winter fundraiser. 14 people died. She disappeared before anyone could stop her. I couldn't breathe. I'm not her. I'm not Eleanor. We know." It was the librarian who spoke, stepping forward. "We've been watching you for weeks, checking your records, your history. You're not her. You just look exactly like her." "Then why?" "Because we needed to be sure." Carl's voice was tired, not threatening. "And because some people in this town will never believe it. They'll always see her face when they look at you." The crowd began to disperse one by one, until only Carl remained. "You should leave," he said. "Not because we'll hurt you, but because this town will never let you be anyone but her ghost. You'll spend the rest of your life being someone else's nightmare." I left Millbrook the next morning. I didn't look back. But sometimes I still dream about that house with the yellow curtains. Sometimes I wake up and don't recognize my own reflection for just a moment. And sometimes I wonder if identity is something we're born with, or something that gets assigned to us by the people who need us to be a certain thing. I wonder if Eleanor Price, whoever she really was, ever felt the same way. I wonder if that's why she burned it all down. I drive for 6 hours straight, putting highway miles between me and Millbrook until the town feels like something I imagined. My hands won't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Every time I glance in the rearview mirror, I expect to see Carl's tired face or the cemetery crowd following me. The words keep repeating in my head. 14 people died. She set fire to the community center. I pull over twice because my vision blurs and I can't focus on the road. The second time, I sit in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes while my heart pounds and my breath comes too fast. A woman pumping gas at the next pump stares at me through my window. I start the car and drive again. By the time I cross into the next state, then the one after that, the sun is setting and my back aches from gripping the wheel too hard. I find a motel on the outskirts of a city big enough that I don't recognize any of the chain stores. The clerk barely looks at my face when I pay cash for 3 nights. The room smells like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals, but nobody here knows about Eleanor Price or February 2019 or a community center fire. I lock the door, check it twice, then collapse onto the bed still wearing my shoes. For 3 days, I don't leave except to get food from the delivery driver who knocks and leaves bags outside my door. I order from different restaurants each time so nobody notices a pattern. My laptop stays open on the small desk. Search window after search window filling the screen. I type Eleanor Price into every search engine I can find. Nothing. I try Eleanor Price Millbrook. The results show a dentist in California and a high school teacher in Maine, neither of them the right person. I search February 2019 Fire Community Center. Articles pop up about fires in other states, other towns, other years. Nothing about Millbrook. I try adding different words. Arson. 14 victims. Winter fundraiser. Every combination leads nowhere. The internet has been scrubbed clean like Eleanor never existed at all. I switch to archived news sites, the kind that store old articles and public records. I search by date range, by location, by keywords. Hours pass while I click through page after page of results that have nothing to do with what I'm looking for. My eyes burn from staring at the screen. I order coffee from a place down the street and drink it cold because I forget it's sitting next to me. Social media platforms are next. I create fake accounts to search for Eleanor Price, for anyone who might have known her or mentioned her. I find 3 Eleanor Prices on one site, 2 on another, none of them the right age or location. I search for Millbrook community groups, local pages, anything that might have discussed the fire. The town has a Facebook page with 42 members. The most recent post is from 6 months ago about a bake sale. I scroll back through years of posts. Potluck dinners, school events, road construction updates. Not one mention of a fire or Eleanor Price or February 2019. It's like the whole town agreed to forget. On the 4th day, I call my aunt. The phone rings 4 times before she answers. Her voice sounds tight and worried when she says my name like a question. I tell her I left Millbrook like she wanted. The relief in her voice is so strong I can hear it through the phone. She asks if I'm okay, where I am, whether anyone followed me. I tell her I'm fine and I'm far away and nobody knows where I went. Then I ask her why she told me to leave. What does our family have to do with Millbrook? Why did she panic when I mentioned the town? She goes quiet. I listen to her breathing on the other end of the line. 30 seconds pass. A minute. I'm about to ask if she's still there when she finally speaks. She tells me this isn't a phone conversation. She tells me to come visit her in person. She tells me she has things to show me that I need to see with my own eyes. I ask her what things. She says she'll explain everything when I get there, but not over the phone. Then she gives me her address even though I already have it and tells me to come as soon as I can. I pack my bag and check out of the motel. The drive to my aunt's house takes 3 hours through back roads and small towns. I've only visited her twice before, both times for family holidays when I was younger. She lives in a ranch house with a neat lawn and flower beds along the front walk. I park in her driveway and sit in the car for a moment, trying to prepare myself for whatever she's going to tell me. When I finally walk up to the front door and knock, she opens it immediately like she was watching for me. Her face goes pale when she sees me. She stares at me the same way the people in Millbrook stared, like I'm someone else wearing a mask. She reaches out and touches my cheek with trembling fingers. Then she pulls me inside and locks the door behind us. She leads me to the kitchen without saying anything. Her hands shake while she fills the kettle and puts it on the stove. I sit at the kitchen table and that's when I notice the newspaper clippings. They're spread across the whole surface, dozens of them. Some yellow with age and others more recent. I lean closer and see dates from the 1970s, headlines about Millbrook, photographs of people I don't recognize. My aunt sets 2 mugs on the counter and turns to face me. She looks older than I remember, or maybe just tired. She tells me she needs to explain something about our family history, something she discovered last year that she's been trying to understand ever since. She sits down across from me and starts talking. Last year, she got interested in genealogy, one of those DNA testing kits that shows you your family tree. She started researching our grandmother's side of the family, looking through old records and census data. That's when she found a mention in an old Millbrook newspaper from 1974. Our grandmother had a sister, A younger sister nobody in our family ever talked about. And this sister married a man from Millbrook and moved there in the early 70s. My aunt shows me the newspaper clipping. It's a wedding announcement. The text barely readable after so many years. But I can make out the names and the date and the town. The family lost touch with this sister decades ago. Nobody knows what happened to her or why she disappeared from family gatherings and holiday cards. My aunt tried asking my mother about it, but my mother didn't remember ever having an aunt or hearing about her grandmother's sister. The whole branch of the family just vanished from our history. Madam, my aunt pulls out a photograph from the pile of clippings. It's grainy and faded, dated 1978 on the back in pencil. A woman stands in front of a house, smiling at the camera. She looks exactly like my grandmother. Same nose, same eyes, same way of holding her shoulders. My aunt points at the photo and tells me this is what made her start digging deeper. This resemblance. She shows me another photo, this one of my grandmother from around the same time. The two women could be twins even though they were sisters born 5 years apart. My aunt explains that this particular bone structure and facial features run strong in our family. They repeat across generations, showing up in daughters and granddaughters and nieces. She shows me a photo of herself from the 80s and I see it too. The same face looking back at me from 3 different decades. My aunt became obsessed with finding this lost branch of the family tree. She spent months tracking down records, calling distant relatives, searching through old phone books and property records. And she finally discovered that the sister and her husband moved away from Millbrook in 2003. They relocated to another state and their trail went cold after that. But my aunt kept searching. She found a second cousin, someone descended from the sister's husband's family. She called this cousin and asked about Millbrook and our missing relatives. The cousin refused to talk about it. She told my aunt to stop digging into Millbrook's history. She said some things are better left buried and hung up. My aunt tried calling back several times, but the cousin blocked her number. That was 6 months ago. My aunt had been trying to decide whether to keep searching or let it go when I called her and told her I'd moved to Millbrook. She looks at me across the table and tells me she panicked when she heard I was living in that town. She'd learned enough to know something terrible happened there, something connected to our family resemblance. She didn't know the specific details about Eleanor or the fire or any of it. She just knew that Millbrook had a dark history, and that a face like ours was somehow part of it. That's why she told me to leave. That's why she hung up and texted me to get out immediately. She was afraid of what might happen to me in a town that had bad memories attached to a face I inherited through no fault of my own. I pull out my phone and scroll to the photograph I took at Eleanor's grave. My hands shake a little as I turn the screen toward my aunt. She leans forward, squinting at first. Then her face goes completely white. She sets down her teacup and it rattles against the saucer. Her hand moves to her mouth and she stares at the image for what feels like a full minute without speaking. Finally, she reaches for her own phone and starts scrolling through old files with fingers that won't quite cooperate. She finds something and shows me a blurry screenshot, barely visible, dated from 6 months ago. It's Eleanor, standing in front of what looks like a post office. The image quality terrible, like it was zoomed in from far away. My aunt tells me she found this one photo online before everything got scrubbed, saved it because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The resemblance isn't just strong, she says quietly. It's impossible to explain in any rational way. We look exactly the same, down to details that shouldn't repeat across unrelated people. She spreads her genealogy research across the table, and we spend the next 4 hours going through everything. Birth certificates, census records, marriage licenses, death certificates, immigration papers from 3 generations back. My aunt has been thorough, tracking every branch of our family tree with dates and locations and sources. But there's nothing connecting us to Eleanor Price. No shared ancestors, no adoptions that might explain it, no family members who moved to Millbrook or had any connection to that area. Eleanor's documented history starts when she arrived in Millbrook 6 years ago, 3 years before the fire. Before that, she's a complete blank. My aunt shows me where she tried to trace Eleanor backward through property records and employment history, but hit a wall at 2016. It's like Eleanor appeared out of nowhere, already an adult, already using that name, with no past anyone can find. My aunt sits back and rubs her eyes. She suggests maybe Eleanor was from our extended family somehow, a distant branch nobody kept in touch with. Maybe she was adopted out or estranged, cut off from family gatherings and holiday cards decades ago, which would explain why nobody recognizes her name even if the genetic resemblance stayed strong. It makes sense in a way, she says, because these facial features run so powerfully through our bloodline. But even as she's saying it, I can see she doesn't quite believe it either. Because it doesn't explain why Eleanor chose Millbrook specifically if she had family connections there. And it definitely doesn't explain what drove her to pour accelerant around the exits of a community center and trap 14 people inside to burn to death. My aunt's voice drops when she says this last part, like speaking it quieter will make it less horrible. I leave around sunset with a thick folder of copied documents tucked under my arm. My aunt walks me to my car and hugs me longer than usual, tells me to be careful, tells me to call her if I need anything. I can see the worry in her face, the same worry that made her hang up and text me to leave Millbrook immediately. She's afraid I'm going to disappear into this mystery the same way Eleanor disappeared into whatever darkness was chasing her. But I can't let it go. If Eleanor looked exactly like me, if we share this face that people in Millbrook will never forget, then understanding her is the only way I'll ever understand why this happened to me. Maybe it won't change anything, but I need to know who she was and what broke inside her. I drive for 2 hours to a city I've never visited before, one far enough from Millbrook that nobody will recognize me or connect me to Eleanor's crimes. The public library is old and quiet, the kind with high ceilings and wooden card catalogs still mounted on the walls, even though everything's digital now. I approach the reference desk and ask about interlibrary loans for newspaper archives from surrounding counties. The librarian, an older man with reading glasses on a chain, explains the process without asking why I need them. I fill out request forms for papers from 3 different towns near Millbrook, all dated February and March 2019. Millbrook might have erased their own records, but a mass casualty event would have made front-page news in every nearby community. The librarian tells me it'll take a few weeks for the microfilm to arrive from storage facilities and other libraries. I thank him and leave my contact information, then spend the rest of the afternoon in my car trying to figure out what to do with myself while I wait. 3 weeks feel like 3 months. I find a cheap apartment in the same city as the library, get a temporary job doing data entry remotely so I can pay rent. Every few days I call the library to check if the newspapers have arrived yet. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, the librarian calls me back and tells me the microfilm reels are ready. I'm there within an hour. He sets me up at one of the old microfilm readers in a quiet corner, shows me how to thread the film and adjust the focus. Then he leaves me alone with stacks of archived newspapers from February 2019. I scroll through edition after edition. Local news about school board meetings and high school basketball games. Obituaries for people who died peacefully in their sleep. Then I find it. February 17th, 2019, 2 days after the fire. The headline takes up half the front page. 14 dead in Millbrook Community Center arson. There's a photograph of the building, or what's left of it, just a burned shell with collapsed roof beams and smoke damage blackening the walls. Fire trucks surround it, firefighters still hosing down hot spots. The article describes how the fire started around 8 p.m. on Friday night, February 15th, during the annual winter fundraiser. The community center was packed with families, maybe 150 people total, kids running around while their parents bid on silent auction items and ate donated food. Someone poured accelerant around the main exits and set it on fire. The doors became walls of flame within minutes. People tried to escape through windows, but some of them were locked or blocked. Investigators determined it was deliberate arson with clear intent to trap people inside. The suspect, Eleanor Price, was identified through security camera footage and witness statements, but she disappeared before police could apprehend her. I keep scrolling and find a follow-up article from the next page. This one focuses on Eleanor herself. Quiet resident who had lived in Millbrook for 3 years, worked remotely as a graphic designer, kept to herself, paid her rent on time, never caused any problems. The article quotes neighbors who sound completely confused. One woman says Eleanor seemed perfectly normal, always said hello, sometimes brought cookies to neighborhood gatherings. Another neighbor mentions Eleanor helped him carry groceries once when he was recovering from surgery. Nobody suspected anything wrong. There were no warning signs, no conflicts with anyone in town, no history of mental illness or violent behavior that anyone knew about. Eleanor was just there, living a quiet life, until suddenly she wasn't. A March 2019 article reveals what happened to Eleanor after the fire. Her body was found in a wooded area about 15 miles from Millbrook, dead from exposure and hypothermia. She'd fled into the wilderness after setting the fire and died alone 3 days later. The article says authorities concluded she chose to disappear rather than face justice for what she'd done. There's a quote from the sheriff saying they would have preferred to bring her in alive so the victims' families could get answers, but at least knowing she was dead brought some closure. I stare at that word, closure, and wonder if anyone in Millbrook actually feels that way. The victim list is printed in a separate article, all 14 names with brief descriptions. The Brennan family, parents and 2 children aged 6 and 9. Martha Lim, 73, volunteer coordinator. Robert Hayes, 61, fire chief who died trying to evacuate people. Jennifer and Michael Oakes, engaged couple planning their wedding. I read every name, every age, every detail about who they were and what they were doing that night. By the time I finish, my hands are shaking and I feel sick. These are the deaths Millbrook sees when they look at my face. These are the people Eleanor killed, and I'm walking around wearing her features like a mask I can't take off. I understand now why the coffee shop owner's hands trembled, why teenagers crossed the street to avoid me, why Carl told me the town would never let me be anyone but Eleanor's ghost. I scroll through more archived pages until I find what I'm looking for. Eleanor Price's obituary sits at the bottom of page 12 in a county paper from 40 miles away. The notice takes up maybe 3 inches of column space. Born August 3, 1987. Died February 18, 2019, in Millbrook. No surviving family members listed. No funeral services scheduled. No charitable donations requested in lieu of flowers. The paper doesn't mention what she did or how she died. Just those bare facts, like she was anyone else, like her death was normal and unremarkable. The notation at the end says simply that she died in Millbrook. Nothing about the fire or the 14 people or any of it. I screenshot the obituary and save it to a folder on my phone that's getting fuller every day. Over the next week, I search for anything about Eleanor before Millbrook. I try every search engine I can think of, every social media platform, every public records database. Nothing comes up. No Facebook profile, no Instagram account, no Twitter presence. I search for her name combined with graphic design, her supposed profession, and find a few Eleanor Prices, but none of them match the right age or location. I try searching for her in professional directories, freelance websites, portfolio platforms. She's not there. I look for property records, voter registration, court documents, anything that would show where she lived before moving to Millbrook 3 years before the fire. The trail goes completely cold. It's like Eleanor Price didn't exist anywhere until she showed up in that small town, lived quietly for 36 months, then burned it all down and walked into the woods to die. I start spending every evening after work searching for explanations. The articles I found mentioned police discovered no manifesto, no suicide note, no journal explaining her actions. Investigators interviewed everyone who knew her and found no history of mental illness, no radicalization, no grudges against anyone in town. The sheriff's statement said Eleanor seemed to have no motive at all, that she just woke up one February morning and decided to kill her neighbors during a fundraiser where families brought their children. I read true crime forums looking for similar cases, trying to find patterns that might explain what happened. Some people commit mass violence because of delusions or voices telling them what to do. Others do it for revenge or ideology or attention. Eleanor didn't fit any of those categories. She planned it carefully, brought accelerant, blocked the exits, then disappeared without leaving any explanation behind. The randomness of it makes my skin crawl worse than if she'd had some twisted reason. The dreams get worse. I wake up 3 or 4 times a night now, always in that room with yellow curtains, always smelling smoke that isn't there. Sometimes I'm standing at a window watching flames. Sometimes I'm running through hallways. Sometimes I'm just sitting on a bed feeling nothing at all. The dreams feel more real than my actual memories lately. I catch myself during the day thinking about that house, wondering what room it was and why the curtains were yellow and what happened there. These aren't my memories, but they're starting to feel like they could be. I wake up one morning and walk to the bathroom and see my face in the mirror, and for just a second, I don't recognize myself. For just a second, I'm Eleanor looking back at me, and I have to grip the sink and remind myself who I actually am. My aunt calls on a Thursday evening while I'm making dinner. I answer and start telling her about the obituary I found, about how Eleanor had no family and no history before Millbrook. My aunt cuts me off and asks why I'm still researching this, why I haven't moved on yet. I tell her I need to understand what would drive someone to do what Eleanor did. My aunt goes quiet for a long moment. Then she says I'm talking about Eleanor like I knew her personally, like we were friends or something. She says I'm using Eleanor's first name constantly, saying it with this familiarity that worries her. I hadn't noticed I was doing that. I tell my aunt I'm just trying to understand, that's all. But she says understanding a monster doesn't require becoming one. She asks if I'm eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of myself. I lie and say yes to all 3. After we hang up, I realize I've been talking about Eleanor for 40 minutes straight, analyzing her actions like I'm trying to solve a puzzle that will somehow explain everything. Maybe my aunt is right to be worried. I decide I need to see where Eleanor died. One article mentioned her body was found in a woodland preserve north of Millbrook, but it didn't give specifics. I tell myself I'm looking for closure, some kind of final understanding that will let me stop thinking about this constantly. Really, I just need to see the place, to stand where she stood in those last hours, to maybe feel something that will make sense of all this. I drive back toward Millbrook on a Saturday morning, my stomach tight with anxiety about getting too close to that town again. I pass the turnoff for Millbrook itself and keep going north until I see signs for the preserve. The parking area is mostly empty, just 2 other cars and a ranger station at the trailhead. The preserve stretches out in dense forest, hiking trails marked with colored blazes on trees. I start walking without any real destination, just following paths deeper into the woods. Eleanor came here after setting the fire. She had 3 days before hypothermia killed her. 3 days to think about what she'd done or to feel nothing at all. I wonder if she felt remorse walking these same trails. I wonder if she felt satisfaction or relief or just emptiness. I wonder if she cried or screamed or stayed silent. The trees are thick enough that sound doesn't carry far. You could disappear here and nobody would find you for days or weeks. Eleanor chose that. Chose to vanish into wilderness rather than face what came next. I've been walking for maybe 2 hours when a park ranger comes down the trail toward me. He's in his 50s, wearing the standard uniform, and he looks concerned. He asks if I'm lost or need help finding my way back. I tell him I'm fine, just hiking, but he studies my face like he's trying to place me. I explain quickly that I'm researching a historical incident. Nothing weird, just trying to understand something that happened here years ago. The ranger nods slowly and says, "People come looking for that spot sometimes, the place where that woman died back in 2019. He says the exact location was never made public, kept quiet to prevent it from becoming some kind of morbid attraction. I ask if he was here when it happened. He shakes his head and mentions his predecessor dealt with the whole investigation, but he heard about it when he took over the position. The ranger tells me the whole thing was strange from what he understands. Eleanor had survival gear with her when they found her body. A tent, sleeping bag, food supplies, water purification tablets, everything you'd need to survive in the woods for weeks. She'd clearly planned to disappear, to live out here and never be found. But she didn't use any of it. The gear was still packed in her backpack, unopened, like she'd carried it all the way out here, and then just gave up on the whole plan. I ask what he means by gave up. The ranger explains that Eleanor was found only 3 days after the fire, and based on where her body was located, she'd barely made it 5 miles into the preserve. She had supplies for weeks, maybe months if she rationed carefully. She had maps and a compass. She had everything she needed to vanish completely. But she didn't set up camp, didn't try to survive, didn't make any effort to use the gear she'd brought. It's like she walked into the woods, found a spot away from the trails, sat down and just stopped. Stopped moving, stopped trying, stopped everything. She died from exposure in early spring when the nights were cold but not deadly, if you had shelter and warmth. The ranger says it looked like she chose to die, like that was always part of her plan. But then why bring all that survival equipment in the first place? I think about that detail the whole drive back to my motel. Eleanor carried survival gear into those woods like she planned to disappear forever, but then she just stopped. She sat down somewhere in the trees and let the cold take her. The ranger's words keep playing in my head about how she had everything she needed to live for weeks or months, but she didn't even unpack her tent. It wasn't suicide exactly because she walked all that way with supplies, but it wasn't survival either. She was doing something else, following some plan that only made sense to her. I pull into the motel parking lot as the sun sets and the sky turns orange and purple. My room smells like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I spread all my notes across the bed again, the newspaper articles and my scribbled timelines and the photographs I printed from the library microfilm. The fire happened on February 15th. Eleanor's grave marker said she died February 18th, 3 days exactly between burning down the community center and dying in the woods. I search my laptop for anything special about February 15th but find nothing. No historical event, no famous tragedy, no reason that date would mean something to someone planning mass murder. I try different search terms, looking for patterns in other crimes, other fires, other cases where someone chose that specific date. Nothing connects. February 15th was just a Friday night in 2019 when Millbrook held their annual winter fundraiser, and Eleanor decided that was the night to destroy everything. I read the victim list again even though I have it memorized. 14 names, ages ranging from 6 years old to 73. I have families who went to support their community and never came home. The fire chief who died trying to save people. A teacher, a mechanic, a retired nurse, 3 children. Eleanor knew these people, lived in the same small town, probably saw them at the grocery store and the post office. She chose to kill them anyway. My bank account is down to $800. I've been living in this motel for 3 weeks, eating gas station sandwiches and instant ramen, not working, just researching a dead woman who looked like me. I need to find a job before my money runs out completely. I need to find a real apartment, start building some kind of normal life. But every time I think about moving on, I see that photograph from Eleanor's grave showing my exact face. I can't let go of needing to understand why. I spend the next 2 days applying for remote jobs, anything that will let me work from wherever I end up. Customer service positions, data entry, virtual assistant work, mindless jobs that pay enough to survive. During video interviews, I catch myself wondering if the person on the other end of the screen sees Eleanor when they look at my face. Do I look like someone who could burn down a building full of people? Is there something in my eyes or my expression that marks me as capable of that kind of violence? The interviewers smile and ask normal questions about my experience and availability, and I answer in my most professional voice while inside, I'm thinking about a woman who wore my face and chose death over facing what she'd done. A company hires me to handle customer service emails for their online store. The pay is low but steady, and they don't care where I live as long as I respond to emails within 24 hours. I give notice at the motel and use my last bit of money to rent a studio apartment in a mid-sized city, 2 states away from Millbrook. The apartment is small and plain with white walls and worn carpet, but nobody here knows about Eleanor Price or the community center fire. I can walk down the street without people crossing to avoid me. I can buy groceries without seeing fear in the cashier's eyes. I set up my laptop on the tiny kitchen table and start my new job answering emails about shipping delays and product returns. The work is boring and repetitive, exactly what I need. During the day, I type responses about refund policies and tracking numbers. At night, I research Eleanor, searching for patterns in her movements, clues in her sparse digital footprint, anything that might explain what happened. Months pass like this. Work during the day, research at night, sleep when I'm too exhausted to keep my eyes open. My aunt calls every Sunday to check on me. She asks how I'm doing, if I'm eating enough, if I've made any friends in my new city. I tell her I'm fine, everything is fine, I'm settling in and moving forward. But she can hear something in my voice that worries her. She tells me I need to let go of this obsession with Eleanor, that it's not healthy to spend all my time thinking about a woman who committed such terrible crimes. I know she's right, but I can't stop. I join online forums about unsolved mysteries and true crime. I read case studies about people who commit seemingly random violence. I post careful questions about perpetrators who had no clear motive, trying to understand the psychology without revealing that I share a face with one of them. Other forum members discuss mental illness, childhood trauma, radicalization, but none of it fits what I know about Eleanor. She wasn't mentally ill according to any records. She had no history of violence or threats. She just lived quietly in Millbrook for 3 years, and then one night she destroyed everything. Someone in a forum posts a theory that makes me stop scrolling. They're talking about people who commit atrocities and then immediately die by suicide, how these people are often acting out some internal narrative they've constructed. The violence isn't about anger or revenge. It's about completing a story they've written in their heads where their death is the final chapter, not an escape from consequences. They plan everything including their own ending, because the ending is the point. I read the post 3 times, then read it again. This fits Eleanor in a way nothing else has. She didn't run into the woods to survive. She ran to complete her story. The fire was Act 1, and her death 3 days later was the planned conclusion. She carried survival gear because that's what someone fleeing into the wilderness would carry, but she never intended to use it. She walked into those trees knowing she would die there. That dying was part of whatever narrative she was living out. The 3 days between the fire and her death weren't about hiding or escaping. They were about existing in some in-between space, some liminal state where she'd completed her terrible act, but hadn't yet reached her planned ending. I start looking into Eleanor's work history because the article said she was a graphic designer. I search for any business websites or portfolios she might have had, anything that could show what kind of person she was before everything happened. It takes hours of searching through archived websites and old business directories, but finally I find something. An archived version of a website called E.B. Price Design pops up on an old web archive service. The site is basic, just a homepage with a portfolio section and a contact page. I click through the portfolio samples and feel disappointed by how ordinary everything looks. Corporate logos for small businesses, wedding invitation designs, some brochures for local events. The work is good enough, professional, but there's nothing personal about it. No style that feels unique to Eleanor, no passion projects or creative experiments. It's like she was just going through the motions, doing work that paid bills without putting any real piece of herself into it. I study each design looking for clues about who she was, but they could have been made by anyone. The wedding invitations are pretty but generic. The logos are clean but forgettable. It's the portfolio of someone performing the role of a normal small-town designer without actually being invested in the work. I click over to the contact page and write down the information listed there. A P.O. box in Millbrook that probably doesn't exist anymore. a generic email address that's long dead. But at the bottom of the page, there's a small copyright notice with the year the site was created, and I realize I can look up the domain registration records. I find a website that archives old domain registration information and type in Eleanor's business name. The records show she registered the domain 8 years ago, and the registration used a physical address for billing purposes, not a Millbrook address. The address listed is in a town called Riverside, 3 states away from here. I stare at this information, feeling my pulse quicken, because this is the first concrete evidence I've found of Eleanor's life before Millbrook. She lived somewhere else before moving here. I search property records for Riverside and find that Eleanor rented an apartment there for 2 years before moving to Millbrook. The apartment was in a small complex on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a basic 1-bedroom unit. I keep digging and find that before Riverside, Eleanor had another rental address in a different state, a town called Greenfield. I spend the rest of the night tracing Eleanor's address history backward through rental records and old utility bills I can find in public databases. She moved every 2 to 3 years like clockwork. Always to small towns nobody had heard of. Always keeping a low profile with no social media presence or community involvement. Riverside for 2 years, then Millbrook for 3. Before Riverside was Greenfield for 2 years. Before that was a town called Ashton for almost 3 years. I map out all the locations, and they're scattered across the country with no pattern I can see, no connection between the places except that they're all small and quiet. It's like Eleanor was running from something or searching for something, moving from place to place trying to find whatever she needed or escape whatever was chasing her. The pattern goes back about 10 years before Millbrook, which means Eleanor spent a whole decade of her life moving between small towns and never settling anywhere permanently. I try to find anything from before that earliest address in Ashton 12 years ago, but there's nothing. No college records with her name, no childhood home address, no family connections I can trace. Eleanor Price seems to appear in official records starting 12 years ago when she was in her late 20s, and before that she's just gone. It's like she didn't exist before Ashton, or she existed under a different name. I lean back from my laptop feeling exhausted and confused. The fire in Millbrook wasn't random violence from a disturbed person. Eleanor had been running from something for years, moving every few years like she was trying to stay ahead of something. Whatever she was running from finally caught up with her in Millbrook, and that's when she burned it all down. The fire was the end point of whatever had been chasing her through all those towns and years. I know I need help to dig any deeper into Eleanor's past. I can't access birth records or sealed documents on my own. I search online for private investigators and find one who handles background checks and historical research. I call the number even though it's late, and a man answers sounding tired but professional. I explain that I need help researching someone's background from before they started using a particular name, and there's a long pause. He asks why I need this information, and I tell him a version of the truth, that I'm trying to understand someone who committed a crime, and I need to know their history. He's skeptical, but agrees to take the case after I explain what I've already found and what I'm looking for. The fee is more than I can really afford right now, but I give him my credit card information anyway, because I need to understand this. I send him all the information I've gathered about Eleanor's addresses and timeline. He says he'll search for birth records, school records, anything that might exist from before Eleanor started her pattern of moving. He warns me it might take several weeks and he might not find anything at all if Eleanor was using an assumed name. I tell him to search anyway because I need to know. The weeks that follow are hard. I go to work during the day typing responses to customer service emails, but my mind is always on Eleanor and what the investigator might find. I check my email obsessively, waiting for updates. My aunt calls every few days asking how I'm doing, and I can hear the worry in her voice when I tell her I'm still researching Eleanor's background. She thinks I'm getting too deep into this, that I'm losing myself in someone else's story. Maybe she's right, but I can't stop now. 6 weeks after I hired him, the investigator finally emails me his report. I open the attachment with shaking hands and read through his findings. There's almost nothing. Eleanor Price appears in official records starting 12 years ago, when she applied for a driver's license in Ashton using that name. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate under that name, no school records, no previous addresses. The investigator writes that Eleanor Price is most likely an assumed identity, that the woman I know as Eleanor was probably using a different name before Ashton. He suggests several possibilities for why someone would change their identity. Witness protection programs sometimes relocate people with new identities. People fleeing abusive relationships sometimes take new names to hide from their abusers. People with criminal pasts sometimes try to disappear and start over. Any of these could explain why Eleanor changed her name and started moving between small towns, and any of them could also explain why she eventually had a breakdown and committed such terrible violence. But there's no way to verify which scenario is true without cooperation from official agencies, and they won't help with a case this old involving someone who's already dead. I read the report 3 times looking for anything I might have missed, but the investigator was thorough. Eleanor's past before Ashton is completely gone, erased or hidden so well that even a professional can't find it. I pay the investigator's final invoice and close my laptop feeling defeated. I'm right back where I started with more questions than answers. The only thing I know for certain is that Eleanor Price spent years running from something, ended up in Millbrook wearing my face, and then destroyed herself along with 14 innocent people for reasons I'll probably never understand. I close the investigator's report and sit in my studio apartment staring at the wall for what feels like hours. Eleanor Price's past is a dead end, a door that leads nowhere, and I've spent thousands of dollars I didn't have chasing a ghost who doesn't want to be found. The investigator's words keep circling in my head about witness protection and abusive relationships and criminal pasts. All these possible explanations that explain nothing at all. I can make up stories about who Eleanor was before she became Eleanor, but that's all they are. Stories I tell myself to fill the empty spaces. The truth is that Eleanor took her reasons to the grave along with 14 innocent people, and no amount of research or money or obsession is going to bring those answers back. My aunt shows up 3 days later without warning, using the spare key I gave her for emergencies. I'm still in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, surrounded by printed documents and handwritten timelines spread across every surface of my apartment. She stands in the doorway looking at the walls where I've taped photographs and news clippings, her face going pale as she takes in the full extent of what I've been doing. She doesn't say anything at first, just walks to my kitchen and starts making tea like she used to when I was a kid and needed comfort. When she finally speaks, her voice is gentle but firm, asking when I last ate a real meal or went outside or talked to anyone who wasn't connected to Eleanor Price. I tell her I ate yesterday, though I can't actually remember what, and she gives me a look that says she knows I'm lying. She sits down on my couch, the only furniture not covered in research materials, and pats the cushion next to her. She tells me I look terrible, that I've lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, that my skin is pale and my eyes have dark circles like I haven't slept properly in weeks. She's right. I know she's right. But I can't seem to care about my own health when there are still questions about Eleanor that need answers. My aunt picks up one of my timelines, studying the dates and locations I've mapped out showing Eleanor's movements over 12 years, and she sets it down carefully like it might break. She asks me what I think I'm going to find, what possible answer would make all this worth sacrificing my own life for, and I don't have a good response. She says I need to let this go, that some questions don't have answers, and that's just how life works sometimes, that I can't spend the rest of my days trying to understand a dead woman who set fire to innocent people. I try to explain that it's not that simple, that Eleanor's face is my face, and everywhere I go, people will see her crimes when they look at me, that understanding why she did it is the only way I can separate myself from what she did. My aunt's eyes fill with tears and she reaches for my hand, holding it between both of hers. She says I'm losing myself in Eleanor's mystery, that I came here after the divorce looking for a fresh start, and instead I found an obsession that's consuming me. She says she's watched me disappear into this research the same way Eleanor disappeared into those woods, and she's scared I won't find my way back out. She begs me to see a therapist, to talk to someone professional who can help me process what happened in Millbrook, and I want to argue but the words stick in my throat. Looking at my apartment through her eyes, seeing the way I've turned my living space into a shrine to a murderer, I realize she might be right. I've been so focused on understanding Eleanor that I stopped taking care of myself, stopped thinking about my own future, stopped being a person separate from this mystery. That night after my aunt leaves, promising to call me every day to check in, I have the dream about yellow curtains again. But this time it's different, more detailed than ever before. I'm in a child's bedroom with sunshine coming through those yellow curtains, and there's a small bed with a patchwork quilt and toys scattered on the floor. The room feels safe at first, warm and comfortable, but then the feeling shifts into something else, something that makes my chest tight with fear. I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy and deliberate, and the doorknob starts to turn slowly. And I want to hide, but there's nowhere to go, and the fear is so intense it feels like drowning. Then I smell smoke, thick and choking, and I wake up gasping in my own bed with my heart trying to break through my ribs. I sit up in the darkness and the smell of smoke lingers even though nothing is burning. My hands are shaking and I'm covered in sweat, and for a few seconds I can't remember who I am or where I am. The dream felt so real, so vivid, like it was an actual memory instead of something my brain made up. I find myself convinced that this is Eleanor's memory somehow, that her experiences are bleeding into my unconscious mind through some connection I don't understand. The child's bedroom, the fear, the smoke. It all feels like pieces of Eleanor's past trying to tell me something important. I get up and write down everything I remember about the dream, adding it to my research materials even though I know this is crazy. I know I'm projecting, creating false memories from stress and obsession, building connections that don't exist because my brain is desperate to make sense of the senseless. The rational part of my mind understands that dreams are just dreams, that my subconscious is processing the trauma of being mistaken for a murderer, and it's creating these vivid scenarios as a way to cope. The dreams always end with smoke because that's how Eleanor's story ends, with fire and death and destruction, and my brain is trying to work through the horror of sharing her face. But knowing this doesn't make the dreams feel less real, doesn't stop me from waking up with the smell of smoke in my nose and the taste of fear in my mouth. It's like my subconscious is trying to tell me something about fire and fear and escape, trying to make me understand something I can't quite grasp. I spend the rest of the night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my research and wondering if I'm slowly losing my mind. 3 days later, I finally make an appointment with a therapist, admitting to myself that I need professional help to process everything that's happened. The therapist's office is in a bland medical building, all beige walls and generic landscape paintings, and I sit in the waiting room filling out intake forms about my mental health history. When the therapist calls me back, she's a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice that makes me want to cry. I tell her the whole story from the beginning, about moving to Millbrook and the resemblance to Eleanor and the grave and the town's reaction, and my obsessive research afterward. She listens without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, and when I finish, she sits back in her chair and considers me carefully. She says what I experienced in Millbrook was deeply traumatic, being confronted with a stranger's crimes while wearing that stranger's face, and my response has been to try to understand Eleanor as a way of protecting myself from being confused with her. The therapist explains that I'm experiencing a trauma response, that my brain is trying to process an impossible situation by obsessively researching Eleanor's background. She says the research gives me a sense of control over something that felt completely out of control, but it's also keeping me stuck in the trauma instead of helping me heal from it. She suggests that what I really need is to focus on my own healing, on rebuilding my identity separate from Eleanor's history, on moving forward with my life instead of backward into a dead woman's past. I want to argue with her, to explain that she doesn't understand how important it is for me to know why Eleanor did what she did, but something in her gentle expression stops me. She asks me what I think understanding Eleanor will accomplish, what I believe will change once I know her story, and I realize I don't have a good answer. Over the next several weeks of therapy sessions, I start to understand that my obsession with Eleanor is really about my own identity crisis. The divorce happened because I lost myself in my marriage, became someone I didn't recognize, and when it ended, I had no idea who I was anymore. The financial collapse left me feeling powerless and ashamed, like I'd failed at being an adult. Moving to Millbrook was supposed to be about finding myself again, starting fresh in a place where nobody knew my history, but instead I found Eleanor, and her history became mine. The therapist helps me see that Eleanor's story gave me something external to focus on, a mystery to solve that felt more manageable than facing my own pain and confusion. It was easier to research a dead woman's crimes than to deal with my own grief and loss and fear about the future. I begin the difficult work of separating Eleanor's story from my own, of accepting that we share a face but we're not the same person. The therapist gives me exercises to practice, ways of redirecting my thoughts when they spiral toward Eleanor, techniques for grounding myself in my own identity instead of hers. She reminds me that I don't need to understand Eleanor to reclaim my own life, that her choices and her crimes and her death have nothing to do with who I am or who I can become. It's hard work, harder than any research I did, because it requires me to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of distracting myself with investigation. I have to feel the grief about my divorce, the shame about my financial situation, the fear about building a new life, all the emotions I was avoiding by focusing on Eleanor. My therapist helps me see that some mysteries are truly unsolvable, and that's okay, that not every question has an answer, and I can learn to live with uncertainty. Eleanor took her reasons to the grave when she died in those woods, and I can choose to let her keep them instead of sacrificing my mental health, trying to dig up answers that don't exist. She asks me what I would do with my time and energy if I wasn't researching Eleanor, what kind of life I want to build for myself, and I realize I haven't thought about my own future in months. I've been so consumed with Eleanor's past that I forgot I have a present and a future that belong to me alone. I box up all my research materials on a Saturday morning, putting every document and photograph and timeline into cardboard boxes. I don't throw them away because I'm not quite ready for that level of letting go, but I tape the boxes shut and carry them down to a storage unit I rent specifically for this purpose. Removing Eleanor's presence from my apartment feels like lifting a weight I didn't realize I was carrying, and when I come back to my empty walls and clear surfaces, I can finally breathe properly. My apartment is mine again, not a shrine to someone else's tragedy, and I stand in the middle of my living room feeling lighter than I have in months. I sign up for a book club at the local library on a Tuesday afternoon, choosing one that meets weekly and reads mostly mysteries and thrillers. The first meeting I attend, nobody stares or whispers or crosses to the other side of the room. They just hand me a copy of the current book and ask if I want coffee. I join a pottery class at the community center on Thursday evenings, and the instructor shows me how to center clay on the wheel without asking where I'm from or if I look familiar. These small, normal interactions feel strange at first, like I'm waiting for someone to recognize something that isn't there. But weeks pass, and I'm just another person in the group, someone who makes lopsided bowls and laughs at her own mistakes. I start getting coffee with a woman from book club named Lisa, and we talk about our favorite authors and our terrible exes without any weight of tragedy hanging over the conversation. At pottery class, I chat with the other students about weekend plans and new restaurants. Ordinary topics that don't require me to explain or defend or prove anything about who I am. Slowly, in these small, repeated moments of being seen as just myself, I remember what it feels like to exist without constant examination. I go to a farmer's market on Saturday mornings and buy fresh vegetables from vendors who smile and make small talk about the weather. I join a gym and take yoga classes where the instructor learns my name and nobody asks about scars or resemblances. These everyday activities feel like rebuilding something I'd lost. The simple ability to move through the world as an individual, rather than a symbol of someone else's nightmare. 6 months after leaving Millbrook, I wake up on a Sunday morning and realize I slept through the entire night without dreaming about yellow curtains. The dreams still come sometimes, usually when I'm stressed or overtired, but they're less frequent now, and I've learned to recognize them for what they are. My therapist helped me understand that my brain was processing the trauma of being mistaken for a murderer, not receiving mystical messages from Eleanor's ghost. When I do dream about smoke and fire, I can wake up and remind myself that these are my fears and anxieties taking shape, not some supernatural connection to a dead woman. I keep a journal by my bed and write down the dreams when they happen, and over time I notice they're getting shorter and less vivid. The house with yellow curtains appears less detailed now, more like a vague impression than a specific memory. My therapist says this is progress, that my mind is slowly releasing the grip of that traumatic period in Millbrook. I still have bad days where the dreams feel more real, or where I catch my reflection and feel a moment of disconnection. But those moments are becoming rare exceptions rather than my daily reality, and I'm learning to be patient with myself when they happen. My supervisor calls me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon and tells me she's been impressed with my work quality and reliability. She offers me a promotion to senior customer service representative with better pay and more flexible hours. I accept immediately, feeling something like pride for the first time in years. The raise is enough that I can afford to move out of my studio apartment into a one-bedroom with actual windows that let in sunlight. I spend a weekend apartment hunting and find a place on the 3rd floor with a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Moving day feels different from when I fled Millbrook with everything thrown into boxes. This time I pack carefully, sorting through my belongings and deciding what to keep and what to donate. I buy new furniture instead of using cast-offs, choosing a bright blue couch and yellow curtains for the living room before I realize what I've done. I stand in the store holding the yellow fabric and feel my chest tighten, but then I buy them anyway because they're my choice, not Eleanor's memory. I hang plants on the balcony and paint the bedroom walls a soft green. I arrange books on shelves and put up photographs of my family and new friends. Standing in my decorated apartment with sunlight streaming through those yellow curtains I chose myself, I realize I'm finally building something stable instead of just surviving day to day. My aunt visits on a Friday afternoon, taking the train in from her town 3 hours away. When I open the door, she hugs me tight and I can feel her relief and how hard she holds on. We sit on my balcony drinking iced tea and she tells me I look healthy, that there's color in my face again and light in my eyes. We talk about the family resemblance that caused so much fear and confusion, but now it's just genetics, just the way certain features repeat across generations. My aunt shows me more photographs from her genealogy research, pointing out how our great-grandmother had the same cheekbones, how a cousin twice removed had similar eyes. We laugh about how our family apparently has very strong genes that insist on showing up generation after generation. She asks if I still think about Millbrook, and I tell her the truth, that I do, but not with the same consuming need to understand. We talk about Eleanor briefly, and my aunt says something that sticks with me, that maybe some people are just broken in ways we'll never understand, and that's not our burden to carry. Before she leaves, she makes me promise to visit her for Thanksgiving, And I agree because I want to spend time with family who sees me as myself, not as anyone's ghost or double. I meet someone at book club during a discussion about unreliable narrators. Their name is Sam, and they make a joke about how all narrators are unreliable because memory itself is fiction, and something about their smile makes me want to keep talking after the meeting ends. We get coffee and discover we both moved to this city within the last year for fresh starts. Sam asks about my past, and I tell an edited version, the one I've practiced with my therapist. I moved here after a divorce to start fresh, needed a change of scenery, wanted to build a new life. It's all true, even if it's not complete. And Sam nods with understanding because they're also rebuilding after their own difficulties. I don't mention Millbrook or Eleanor or the cemetery or the photograph. These parts of my history are mine to keep or share as I choose, and right now I choose to keep them private. We start meeting for coffee every week after book club, then going to movies, then cooking dinner at each other's apartments. Sam asks questions about my life, and I answer honestly about the parts I'm ready to share. It feels powerful to have boundaries, to decide which stories belong in new relationships and which ones I'm still processing privately. When Sam holds my hand walking home from a restaurant, I don't think about whether they see Eleanor's face or mine. I just feel the warmth of their palm against mine and let that be enough. A year after leaving Millbrook, I take stock of my life on a quiet Sunday morning. I have friends who text me to make weekend plans and coworkers who invite me to happy hours. I have a relationship with Sam that's developed into something meaningful and stable, built on honesty and mutual respect. I have a job I'm good at where my supervisor values my contributions and my opinion matters in team meetings. I have an apartment that feels like home, decorated with things I chose because I like them, not because they were cheap or available. Most importantly, I have a sense of self that isn't defined by Eleanor's crimes or Millbrook's collective trauma or my resemblance to a dead woman. When I introduce myself to new people, I'm just me, with my own history and personality and quirks. I can talk about my divorce without shame, my financial struggles without embarrassment, my choice to start over without having to justify it. The person I see in the mirror is someone I'm slowly learning to recognize and even like someone who survived something bizarre and traumatic and came out stronger. I still have therapy appointments every other week and probably will for a while longer. I still have moments of anxiety or self-doubt or confusion about identity. But these are normal human struggles, not the consuming obsession that defined my months of researching Eleanor. I think about Eleanor sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, or when I see news stories about senseless violence. I wonder what happened to her that made her capable of such horror. What pain or anger or broken part of her psyche drove her to murder 14 innocent people. But I think about her with distance now, the way you might wonder about any historical tragedy without letting it consume your daily life. I've accepted that I'll never know why she did what she did, that she took her reasons to her grave when she died alone in those woods. Not knowing doesn't mean I'm incomplete, or that there's some missing piece of myself I need to find. Our shared appearance was just bad luck and genetics, not destiny or cosmic connection. I don't need to understand Eleanor to be whole, and her choices have nothing to do with who I am or who I'm becoming. Sometimes I feel sad for her in an abstract way. Sad that she was so broken she could only express herself through destruction. But that sadness doesn't mean I'm responsible for explaining her or carrying her story forward. I can acknowledge that she existed, that she did terrible things, that she looked like me, and then I can let her rest in whatever peace or torment she found in death. My aunt and I sit at her dining room table on Thanksgiving afternoon, surrounded by her genealogy research spread across every available surface. This time we're looking for positive family stories instead of dark mysteries and missing connections. We find a great-great-grandfather who was a music teacher and composed small pieces for local celebrations. We discover an aunt who ran a successful bakery during the Depression and fed half the neighborhood for free when times were hardest. There's a cousin who became a rural doctor and delivered babies in farmhouses across 3 counties. These are ordinary people who lived ordinary lives marked by small kindnesses and quiet perseverance. My aunt shows me photographs of family reunions from the 1950s. Everyone gathered around picnic tables and we try to identify faces and match them to names in her records. We find farmers and teachers and factory workers, people who raised families and paid their bills and helped their neighbors. This is my real inheritance. Not Eleanor's crimes or Millbrook's trauma, but generations of regular people doing their best with what they had. We laugh about family quirks that seem to repeat, like how every generation apparently includes at least one person who's terrible at cooking, but insists on hosting holidays anyway. By the time we finish going through the research, I feel connected to something larger than myself, in a way that's comforting rather than frightening. Sam notices the small scar above my left eyebrow one evening while we're cooking dinner together. They reach up and trace it gently with their thumb, asking how I got it. I tell them the true story, the whole story, the one that's mine alone. I was 7 years old playing in my grandmother's backyard, climbing a tree I'd been told was too tall for me. I fell and hit my head on a branch on the way down, and my grandmother rushed me to the emergency room where I got 3 stitches. I remember being more upset about the ruined tree climbing than the pain, and my grandmother buying me ice cream afterward to make up for the scary hospital visit. Sam listens and smiles, saying it's a good story. Very me to have ignored warnings about the tree being too tall. They kiss the scar lightly, and we go back to chopping vegetables for dinner. This small moment feels more powerful than it probably should. But I realize it's because I'm reclaiming this mark as mine, not Eleanor's. The scar has been on my face since I was 7, years before Eleanor probably even existed as a person. It belongs to my history, my childhood, my relationship with my grandmother who died when I was 15. Eleanor might have had an identical scar in that photograph at her grave, but she doesn't get to own this part of my body or my past. This mark is mine, earned through childhood recklessness and healed through family love, and no resemblance to a dead woman can take that away from me. I'm folding laundry on a Saturday afternoon when the thought comes to me fully formed and clear. Identity isn't something that gets assigned to us by others or inherited through appearance or determined by genetics and bone structure. No, it's built through choices and relationships and the daily work of being ourselves, through the small decisions we make about who to be kind to and what work to do and how to spend our limited time. I've spent this past year actively building an identity that's authentic and mine, constructed from therapy sessions and book club meetings and pottery classes and conversations with Sam. Every time I chose to get out of bed during the hard months, every time I went to therapy instead of hiding in my apartment, every time I introduced myself to someone new despite my fear, I was building who I am. The person I've become isn't defined by my divorce or my financial struggles or my resemblance to Eleanor Price. I'm defined by how I responded to those challenges, by my choice to keep trying even when it was easier to give up, by my willingness to be vulnerable enough to make new friends and start a new relationship. Eleanor and I might have shared a face, but we're completely different people because we made completely different choices about how to exist in the world. She chose destruction, and I'm choosing construction, building a life piece by piece from the rubble of my worst year. I think about Eleanor sometimes when I'm cooking dinner or folding laundry or doing any of the small tasks that make up a normal life. I wonder if she ever had moments like these, peaceful and ordinary, before whatever happened to her turned her into someone who could destroy so many lives. Maybe somewhere in her past, she lost the ability to build her own identity the way I'm building mine now, piece by piece through choices and relationships and the daily work of being a person. Maybe that's what led to her destruction, that loss of self that made violence seem like the only way to be seen or remembered or to matter at all. But I've learned something important through therapy and time and the hard work of healing. Empathy doesn't require understanding every detail of someone's story. And I can feel sad for Eleanor without needing to know exactly what broke inside her or why she made the choices she made. I can acknowledge that she was a person who suffered in some way, while also knowing that her suffering doesn't excuse what she did to those 14 people and their families. These two truths can exist together without contradiction, and accepting that has helped me let go of the obsession that almost consumed me. I look in the mirror now and see myself, not Eleanor's ghost staring back at me. The resemblance is still there, obviously, the same bone structure and features that caused so much trouble in Millbrook, but it doesn't define me anymore. When I think about that town, it's with the distant sadness you feel for any tragedy, the way you might read about a disaster in the news and feel genuine sorrow for the victims while knowing it's not your burden to carry. The consuming obsession that once defined my days has faded into something manageable, a story I can tell about a strange and difficult time in my life without it pulling me under. I'm happy now in a way that feels earned and real, built through therapy sessions and hard conversations, and the choice to keep trying even when it was easier to give up. I've learned that you can't always understand why terrible things happen, but you can choose to build something good anyway, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Okay, that's what I think. Now I want to hear how wrong you think I am. Say it in the comments, I'm genuinely curious.